Founded in 1971 by a group of peace activists in Vancouver, Canada, Greenpeace's first protest aimed to stop a U.S. nuclear weapons test in the Aleutian Islands off the west coast of Alaska. The crew sailed an old 80-foot fishing vessel, the Phyllis Cormac, from Vancouver to the U.S. test zone on Mchitka Island to prevent the nuclear explosion. Bad weather and problems with the boat kept them from reaching Mchitka, and the test went off as planned. The despondent crew sailed back to Vancouver, thinking they had failed. As it turned out, however, their actions set off a wave of international protest that ultimately made it impossible for the United States to continue testing in the Aleutians. The crew returned to a hero's welcome in Vancouver. The tiny island of Mchitka was designated a wildlife sanctuary, and Greenpeace was born. From those humble beginnings, Greenpeace has grown into the global organization it is today, with offices in over 40 countries around the world. We are an independent campaigning organization that uses a wide range of strategies and tactics to expose environmental problems and promote solutions that are essential to a green and peaceful future. We provoke solutions to global problems by inspiring action. The actions we take, the integrity of our work, and the light we shine on environmental atrocities has inspired millions of people to become involved themselves. They are, in turn, the ultimate force that brings about the transformational change that needs to occur in order to protect our planet. Globally, Greenpeace works in 3 priority areas: stopping global warming, protecting ancient forests, and defending the world's oceans. For each of these priorities, we seek to achieve the following objectives. The goal of Greenpeace's global warming campaign is to achieve a worldwide carbon emissions peak by 2015 with a decline thereafter. We seek to keep our planet under 2 degrees Celsius threshold that science says we must achieve to avoid catastrophic climate change. In the U.S., our main focus is on the coal industry, which is a primary contributor to global warming. Our goal is to shut down 1/3 of all U.S. coal plants by 2015. We have joined with local communities across the country to shut down aging, dirty coal plants and are helping to establish these sites as part of a national network with a common purpose. We also advocate for strong laws to curb global warming and put America on a path to clean energy. Part of this involves exposing climate deniers and holding them publicly accountable for providing millions of dollars to lobby against climate and clean energy policies. We aim to kickstart an energy revolution by advocating for clean energy alternatives like solar and wind power. The goal of Greenpeace's forest campaign is to achieve zero global deforestation, with a specific target area in Indonesia and the Amazon by 2015. Forest destruction is a primary contributor to global warming and is a principal objective for Greenpeace. Our forest efforts focus in critical regions like the Amazon and the Paradise Forest in Indonesia to stop broad-scale destruction of critical habitats. Our work is driven by the need to protect the climate, ensure biodiversity, and protect the right of native residents. Our efforts focus primarily on the corporations who play the largest roles in forest destruction. Greenpeace attacks their brand and engages their customers to get them to change their practices. Our Oceans campaign is based on the overarching goal of establishing a global network of no-take marine reserves that will cover 40% of the world's oceans. To accomplish this, we are focusing on protecting the polar oceans and establishing high seas reserves in the Western and Central Pacific and in the Mediterranean to protect bluefin tuna. We are also focusing on establishing protected areas in the Bering Sea canyons that will limit trawling. We will work toward a national policy reform in the U.S. establishing overfishing standards and ecosystem-based management. We are focusing on retail supermarket chains to push for strong company seafood procurement policies while also pressuring them to avoid buying red-listed fish. We will also create whale conservation countries in the Caribbean. These countries will support whale conservation measures at the International Whaling Commission, as well as establish whale sanctuaries in Caribbean waters. In addition to the network of support earned by our research and expertise, Greenpeace wins victories of greatest significance when we successfully focus on pressuring corporations to do the right thing. Secondly, we focus on pressuring government bodies to adopt environmentally responsible laws and policies. Our work in targeting corporations is tenacious and hard-hitting. We leverage our brand, global reach, actions expertise, uncompromising principles, communications prowess, and grassroots base to achieve transformational victories. A lot of our success in the corporate arena comes from our ability to expose bad players and their practices through the media and effectively engage and mobilize their customers. Our work with government bodies is based on the fact that we are fully independent and come more from an outside perspective. Our government-focused work involves exposing and undermining corporate influence, mobilizing an outside power base, and pushing for what science says we must achieve. Greenpeace moves beyond what is deemed to be politically possible and constantly pushes the proverbial envelope for what is expected of governments. When addressing the issues that we work on, Greenpeace takes a principled, scientific-based position, communicates to people in a way that appeals to core human values and inspires action, uses an extensive toolbox of strategies and tactics to shift the dynamics of power to create space for significant environmental change. In the corporate arena, Greenpeace has been immensely successful in our efforts to protect the paradise forest of Indonesia by focusing on the primary corporate players in that territory. The two primary areas of forest destruction in that region are caused by clearing forests to grow palm oil and cutting down trees for pulp and paper. Greenpeace wins campaigns against the purchasers of these products to get them to act responsibly and ultimately shift the industries involved to become positive influence instead of negative ones. As part of these efforts, Greenpeace has helped bring about new corporate policies and purchasing practices that will protect critical habitat for endangered orangutans and Sumatran tigers. While our uncompromising approach is highlighting the destructive practices of bad corporate actors is an essential part of our effectiveness, we will stand at the podium with the corporation when they decide to do the right thing. Given our reputation for being fierce, uncompromising, and hard-hitting, public support from Greenpeace for a company's change in policies and practices is perceived by them to be highly valuable. We have been focusing extensively on exposing and undermining corporate influence that has derailed governmental efforts to stop climate change. A lot of this corporate influence is leveraged behind the scenes, out of the view of the public eye. One of the things Greenpeace does is research and expose the companies and individuals involved and highlight publicly their undue influence and destructive agendas. We also derive a lot of our effectiveness from the grassroots organizing we do across the country. Our global warming campaign is targeting the coal industry and aims to work with local communities to shut down aging coal plants. We help develop leaders, provide resources and expertise, and support these local fights as part of a national network with a common purpose. Previously, we helped local efforts win shutdown decisions for 3 plants. Other elements that make Greenpeace successful are our global reach and our reputation. We have people working around the world on the issues we take on, with people on the ground in the forests of Indonesia and Brazil, and campaigners in places like the US and Europe who are taking on the corporate targets who purchase products from these regions. And finally, there is Greenpeace's reputation. We take positions based on science instead of compromised positions based on political calculations. We effectively communicate to people on a broad scale and in a way that appeals to core human values and inspires action. Plus, we follow through and refuse to relent. We measure success by evaluating short-term milestones that are part of our long-term goals and objectives, and how the success of the former will lead to the latter. For instance, our long-term goal for Indonesia is to end destructive deforestation in that country. We have long-term objectives that focus on the commercial industries that are driving deforestation and habitat destruction, palm oil and pulp and paper. Our measure of success is whether our victories can lead us to transformational change for the arenas in which we work. Getting companies to change their purchasing policies is only a success if it's part of a larger goal of transforming the industries that contribute the most to rainforest destruction in Indonesia. Closing down a local coal plant is only a success if it's part of a plan to end our use of coal in this country and ultimately stop catastrophic climate change. Our individual successes must collectively have symmetry, where the total is greater than the sum of its parts. While Greenpeace is well known for its highly visible creative confrontation, whether it be positioning ourselves between a whaling ship and a whale, or chaining ourselves to bulldozers, or hanging a banner on a corporation's headquarters, Many people don't understand that these activities are really just a small part of what Greenpeace does. While these actions are obviously a part of our signature as an organization, they're not what we think we should be known for. One thing that the person on the street probably does not know about Greenpeace is the amount of first-of-its-kind research that we do. It's an essential part of who we are, and our efforts are widely recognized in the scientific community. For instance, a few years ago, we conducted the first manned exploration of 2 deep-water canyons in the Bering Sea. Scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, participating in peer-reviewed research accompanied us on board. That excursion produced new knowledge of endangered species in these areas, revealed evidence of damaged corals from trawling, and, most exciting, the discovery of a newly identified species of sponge. Greenpeace aspires to be known as the organization that employs the best possible strategies to win campaigns, whether it's through scientific research, running markets campaigns against corporations, lobbying in Congress and at the United Nations, organizing in communities against coal plants, or putting ourselves between a whaling ship and a whale. We do what we think is the best thing to win. And in the process, we hope to inspire others to become concerned and get involved themselves. And while these actions are obviously adversarial and often controversial, they are always peaceful. Greenpeace sometimes gets lumped into a category of zealous movements that might use violence as part of their tactics. We've even been described as terrorists by either our opponents who want to brand us that way or by people who don't really understand what we do. But Greenpeace is founded on a stringent principle of nonviolence and only uses tactics that are peaceful and don't put others in harm's way. Greenpeace has achieved many accomplishments that have positively contributed to a greener planet. These include a ban on the use of large-scale drift nets on the high seas, a ban on hazardous waste trade from highly industrialized nations to less industrialized ones, an end to ocean dumping of radioactive waste, a global ban on the burning of toxic waste at sea, a 50-year moratorium on all oil and mineral exploration in Antarctica, effectively establishing the continent as a world park, an international ban on commercial whaling, and the passage of the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement, which brought 8 environmental groups and 21 forest companies together to establish protections for 188 million acres of Canadian boreal forest. This included a logging moratorium on nearly 72 million acres and protection for virtually all of the habitat of the threatened woodland caribou. Greenpeace grew to its largest size and to the height of its popularity in the late 80s, following the global awareness that resulted from the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior in 1985. The environment was the #1 issue in the public consciousness during that time. As the organization brought in more revenue, we expanded to take on more and more campaigns and built more infrastructure to support them. Somewhat nobly, though not very wisely, we also spent our revenue as it came in, as the feeling of urgency surrounding our work outweighed the desire to save for a rainy day. In the early 90s, 3 things happened that brought this prosperity and questionable business model to a screeching halt. The economy collapsed, the environment lost its place on the top of the mantle of public awareness, and Greenpeace lost many supporters when it took a stand against the first Gulf War and labeled it as a war for oil. With the sharp decline in revenue and little in reserve, Greenpeace was forced into a series of budget cuts that reached its lowest point in 1997, when the organization essentially had to rebuild itself from scratch. As can often be the case, however, there was a silver lining to this otherwise proverbial dark cloud. Greenpeace forced itself to establish organizational priorities and focus its resources and expertise into 2 main issue areas: forests and oceans. And a few years later, global warming was added as a priority. We restructured our funding approach, focused more on creating a good donor experience and keeping our supporters long-term instead of getting the biggest bang out of every mail piece. And as a result, we grew back stronger and more focused than before, with tough, effective, globally coordinated campaigns and a loyal, growing donor base. More recently, and on a bit of a different note, when the Waxman-Markey climate change bill was first introduced in 2009, we saw this as fulfilling our assessment of the political landscape and justifying our decision to organize in targeted congressional districts on the issue of climate change. We in turn put our support behind the bill and pushed for its passage up to the point where it became so watered down by corporate interests that we felt we could no longer back it. This was especially difficult for us to absorb because of the investment we had made in a grassroots organizing effort over a period of years and the passage of climate change legislation we had established as a primary objective. As we took a step back to evaluate, the results showed us that we had, 1, overestimated the power of the public's interest in stopping climate change, and 2, underestimated the influence of corporations to derail it. From those lessons, we turned our focus exposing climate deniers and holding them publicly accountable with the aim of reducing their influence in Congress, and organizing nationally to shut down coal plants, as the victories would not only reduce the influence and carbon footprint of the industry, but also build a movement to stop climate change in a more tangible, stepwise manner. As we've discussed earlier, our goals are very ambitious, which they have to be since we have based them on what science says we have to achieve. We are aiming to close 1/3 of all U.S. coal plants by 2015. We are working towards zero deforestation globally. We are working to establish 40% of the world's oceans as protected marine reserves. What this means is that all of our campaigns are scalable, and that additional resources will help us take our current campaigns and their inherent strategies to the next level of engagement. For instance, if we apply more resources to our coal campaign, we can train more organizers and provide more resources to local fights, thereby leading to more shutdowns at a faster pace. If we apply more resources to our forest campaign, we can take on more targets and ramp up the campaigns we run against them, thereby putting more pressure on the corporate forces that contribute the most to ancient forest destruction. Something specific we would consider doing with additional resources is running more ad campaigns against specific targets. Paid advertising at key moments in targeted media outlets has proven to be an effective tactic in our efforts previously. For example, we ran an ad in the USA Today in 2010 that focused on Obama when it was reported that the U.S. delegation to the International Whaling Commission might support a proposal to overturn the ban on commercial whaling. He told us personally at a meeting we had with him later that same year that he had seen the ads, and in the end, the U.S. maintained its support for keeping the ban on commercial whaling in place. A primary gap Greenpeace would like to fill is our ability to effectively respond to unexpected challenges. This has two basic manifestations. One is our ability to rapidly respond to disasters, such as the Gulf oil spill, that demand immediate attention. And a second is our ability to address issues that might arise, which we might not be anticipating, such as those obstacles and opportunities that present themselves as technology expands and evolves. As for rapid response, Greenpeace did respond quickly and effectively to the Gulf oil spill in 2010, serving as a primary on-the-ground source of expertise, information, and exposure while capturing visual images that helped tell the real story of what was happening in the face of governmental efforts to keep bad news out of the public eye. While we have no doubt that it was the right thing for us to do, it came at considerable cost to some of our ongoing work as funds had to be reallocated from existing campaigns. We were able to raise funds specifically to support our Gulf work, but that only covered part of our costs. For every event like the Gulf oil spill that we do respond to, a significant number of other issues arise for which a need exists, but our current human and financial capacity cannot support. We are currently working to restructure our budgeting and planning to better allow for us to respond to emergencies and unexpected opportunities without compromising other work in which we're engaged. Given the potential for these types of events like the Gulf oil spill, particularly as the failure of governments continues to allow increasingly risky and experimental fossil fuel exploration, it is a reasonable expectation that they will come about with some degree of regularity. Greenpeace needs to be poised and ready to respond to them when they do. As for addressing environmental threats that are difficult to foresee, Greenpeace has a history of being on the leading edge in matters such as these. For example, in the 1990s, no one had ever heard of dioxin before Greenpeace helped publicize the discovered effects of bleach in various consumer products and the pathways by which this toxin was inadvertently consumed by people. We were one of the first organizations to realize that genetically modified seeds and crops were being developed and one of the first to take action to stop them. We've drawn attention to unexpected energy costs of cloud computing, the reliance of otherwise forward-thinking social media entities on coal-fired electricity, and the toxic risks posed by laptops and mobile phones. What else is on the horizon that might need to be addressed? Again, the technology of today and tomorrow would seem to not only be a gateway to new possibilities, but also to unknown problems. For instance, the well-known documentation that bees and their hives are disappearing at an alarming rate has theories ranging from electromagnetic pollution to genetically modified foods to global warming as being the causes. What about nanotechnology? Who knows what kind of a Pandora's box that entails? And if carbon capture and storage, otherwise known as CCS, gets real traction as a possible technological solution to global warming, who will provide accountability and ensure that it's not a diversion from the real problem, a de facto payoff to the coal industry and a derailment to real solutions like solar and wind? Currently, we are hard-pressed to really examine these issues for their possible implications and would find it difficult to effectively address them if they do in fact emerge as real threats that need attention.